door tapping softly in the wind. At 9:14 every morning, Eleanor Briggs stepped out onto her porch. Not early, not late, never once off schedule. One hand on the railing, one careful breath. Then the slow walk down a cracked stone path toward the mailbox at the end of her driveway. And for 6 years, almost nobody noticed. Not the mailman, not the neighbors, not the woman jogging past with headphones in, not the dads backing out of driveways with coffee cups between their knees, not the police cruiser that rolled through Maple Street every other morning like routine itself had a badge. But one man noticed. A biker with oil on his knuckles and old damage in his eyes. And 3 days after Eleanor vanished, he was the only reason anyone learned she hadn't simply gone missing. Because the truth was worse. Much worse. And before this day was over, that quiet old woman on the edge of Maple Street would force an entire town to confront what happens when a human being becomes part of the background. Remember this, if she missed the mailbox, something was wrong. Maple Street was the kind of place people described as peaceful because they didn't look too closely. White fences with chipped paint, lawns cut just often enough. The smell of fertilizer, hot pavement, and someone's bacon drifting from an open kitchen window before 9 in the morning. It looked safe from a distance. Eleanor's house sat at the far end like an afterthought. The shutters had faded. The porch sagged slightly on the left side. Weeds pushed through the garden stones like they had stopped asking permission years ago. But every morning, right on time, Eleanor emerged in a pressed cardigan and sensible shoes, silver hair pinned back, face unreadable in the pale gold light. She would walk to the mailbox, open it, look inside, pause, then close it gently, like whatever she expected wasn't there yet, but still might be tomorrow. No one asked why. They just built stories around her because stories are easier than concern. Maybe she was waiting on a son. Maybe she was lonely. Maybe she was just old. But Marcus Hale never laughed about her. Every morning, his black Harley rolled down Maple Street on the way to the garage across town. Low engine rumble, leather vest, grease under the fingernails, the faint smell of motor oil and cigarette smoke that never quite left him, even after he quit both. At first, Eleanor was just part of the scenery. Then she became a pattern, and Marcus trusted patterns. He trusted them because chaos had nearly killed him once. So when he passed her, he'd lift 2 fingers from the handlebar. Nothing dramatic, just respect. And Eleanor, without smiling, would look up as if to say, "Yes, I see you too." That was enough, for both of them. Until the morning her porch was empty, Marcus noticed before his brain put words to it. The absence hit first. That strange hollow in the chest when reality is missing one piece and everything feels tilted. No Eleanor, no cardigan, no slow walk, just a porch washed in weak morning light and a front door shut too still. He kept riding. Told himself maybe she was tired, maybe sick, maybe at a doctor's appointment. But the next morning, he looked again. Still nothing. No Eleanor, no movement behind the curtains, no mailbox ritual. This time his stomach tightened. Because people like Eleanor didn't skip routines. Not routines built over years. Not routines worn smooth by repetition. You don't do the same thing for 6 years and just stop. By day 3, Marcus cut speed before he reached her house. Kids on bikes flew past without looking. A golden retriever barked from 2 houses down. Wind dragged dry leaves along the curb with a brittle scraping sound. Somewhere, a lawn sprinkler ticked across a patch of grass. Normal morning. Wrong house. He coasted to the curb and let the bike idle. The mailbox door sat slightly ajar. That was new. Marcus stared at it. Small detail. Big problem. His jaw flexed. He killed the engine. Silence rushed in fast and heavy. Across the street, old Mrs. Werner was dragging her trash can back from the curb. She glanced at Marcus, then at Eleanor's house, then away again. Like maybe she'd noticed something was off but didn't want ownership of it. That was Maple Street's real talent. Outsourcing responsibility. Marcus stepped off the bike. The gravel crunched under his boots as he crossed the driveway. The morning smelled like damp earth and cut grass and something faintly metallic in the air, though maybe that was memory creeping in. He climbed the porch steps slowly. One board gave a tired groan under his weight. He knocked. "Ma'am?" Nothing. He knocked harder. "Eleanor?" Still nothing. Then he saw it. The front door wasn't latched, just slightly open, barely off the frame. And in that moment, every nerve in Marcus lit up. Not curiosity now, not concern. Instinct. The dangerous kind. The useful kind. He pushed the door open, and the house answered with silence. Deep. Cold. Wrong. Inside, the light was dim and stale, filtered through curtains drawn tighter than usual. The room smelled like old tea, dust, and something disturbed. A chair had been knocked sideways near the kitchen table. A ceramic teacup lay shattered on the floor, brown stain dried in a crescent against the tile. The hallway rug was bunched up, twisted like a struggle had snagged it in passing. Marcus didn't move for a second. He just looked, measured, counted. A house tells on people when something bad has happened. This house was talking. Near the hallway, one slipper lay on its side. Only one. Marcus crouched and picked it up. Soft blue fabric, worn sole. Still shaped to her foot. Damn it, he whispered, because now he knew. This wasn't a missed errant. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't an old woman wandering off. Eleanor Briggs had been taken. And somewhere in the back of his mind, something he'd ignored 2 nights ago came roaring forward. A white van. Parked too long. Lights off. Engine idling. He rose fast, already reaching for his phone. But even as he called 911, one thought kept hammering in his skull. If she missed the mailbox, something was wrong. And for 3 days, no one but him had listened. The police arrived with clipboards, flashlights, and the careful calm of people who hadn't yet caught up to danger. Marcus hated that tone. The one that says, maybe this is serious, maybe it's not, let's not rush. A patrol car rolled onto the curb with tires crunching softly over gravel. 2 officers stepped out into the thin mid-morning sunlight. One young and eager, the other older, heavier, already tired of the paperwork this would become. Their radios crackled. A dog barked somewhere down the block. The neighborhood started peeking through blinds like concern only counted if it stayed indoors. Marcus stood on Eleanor's porch with his arms folded tight. Inside, the officers moved through the house. One of them called out, "Kitchen disturbance. Possible fall." Marcus turned, slow and sharp. That wasn't a fall. The older officer glanced at him. "We'll determine that." Marcus bit back what he wanted to say. He had spent too much of his life around violence not to recognize the quiet kind, the efficient kind, the kind that doesn't leave movie scene chaos, just displaced objects. Interrupted gestures. One missing slipper. A life cut off mid-motion. The older officer came back outside a few minutes later, notebook open. "You said you're the one who noticed she hadn't been seen?" Marcus nodded. "How well did you know her?" "I didn't." The officer lifted a brow. "I saw her every morning," Marcus said. "Same time, same routine, 6 years." The officer scribbled. Not convinced. Marcus kept going. 2 nights ago there was a white van down the street, no side windows, parked with the lights off. That got a little more attention. "Plate? No. Make? No. How long?" "Long enough." The officer sighed through his nose like half the town's story started with a suspicious van. "Anything else?" Marcus looked him dead in the eye. "She didn't leave that house on her own." The officer gave the slow nod people use when they want you quiet more than they want you right. That's when Lena showed up. Lena Ortiz was 16, all elbows and energy, with purple streaks in her dark hair and a backpack covered in button pins and duct tape patches. She lived 2 houses over with her grandmother and delivered groceries after school for half the neighborhood, mostly because she couldn't stand watching old people carry things they shouldn't. She skidded up on her bicycle, breathless. "What happened?" Marcus didn't answer right away. Lena looked past him into the open doorway, and her whole face changed. No, not Miss Eleanor." "You know her?" the officer asked. "Better than you do," Lena shot back. Marcus almost smiled. Lena pointed toward the porch rail. "She leaves sunflower seeds here for the cardinals. Every morning. The little red ones come around 9,000 too." The younger officer actually looked. Empty rail, no seeds. That landed. Lena turned to Marcus. "When was the last time you saw her?" 3 mornings ago." Lena stared at the mailbox, then whispered it like a prayer gone bad. If she missed the mailbox, something was wrong. Marcus looked at her. So that was 2 of them now. The police stretched yellow tape across the front walk. Neighbors started collecting in 2s and 3s at the edge of the lawn, pretending not to gossip while absolutely gossiping. Someone whispered that Eleanor had dementia. Someone else said maybe family picked her up. Mrs. Warner said she'd been meaning to check in, which was the kind of sentence that only shows up too late. Lena heard all of it. Her face hardened. Now they notice. Marcus leaned against the porch post, eyes scanning the street. People notice tragedy, not people. The younger officer came back outside. We'll canvass the neighborhood. Marcus straightened. I'll do it too. The older one frowned. We don't need civilians interfering. Marcus stepped closer, low voice, controlled. Then don't interfere with me. That should have gone badly. Instead, Lena jumped in. She's right there on the community watch app every morning, she said, already pulling out her phone. Mrs. Tay. Bender posts squirrel pictures at 9/2012, and the camera on the Kessler garage points toward Maple. Also, Mr. Jensen has one of those motion floodlights that records. The younger officer blinked. How do you know that? Lena gave him a look. Because I live here. That was the lovable thing about Lena. She moved the story forward not because she was fearless, but because she believed paying attention was a form of love. Within 20 minutes, Marcus and Lena were going door to door, while police knocked more formally on the other side of the block. Most people remembered nothing, or said they did. A man in a golf shirt said he'd heard some kind of clatter 2 nights back, but couldn't place the time. A babysitter remembered a van but thought it belonged to a contractor. A woman watering her roses said Eleanor had always seemed private, as if privacy made vanishing less urgent. Every answer felt soft around the edges. Then they found Tommy Rake, 10 years old, dirty knees. Bite chain grease on one hand, sitting on a curb, drinking orange soda straight from the can. Marcus crouched to his level. You see anything around Miss Eleanor's place the other night? Tommy shrugged first, then looked at Lena, then at Marcus's Harley. Maybe. Marcus waited. Tommy licked soda from his lip. White van, parked by the elm tree, no windows in the back. I thought it was creepy. Which night? The one before the rain. He pointed with the can. It left late. Which way? Tommy pointed toward the highway. Marcus felt the answer settle cold in his chest. Direction, movement, intent. This was no random lift, no confused elder wandering. Someone came for Eleanor. Someone watched her. Someone knew her schedule. Lena was already typing notes into her phone. There's an industrial strip off Route 9 with storage lots and old warehouses. Marcus looked at her. You know that fast. My uncle used to work security out there. The police still weren't moving with the urgency Marcus wanted. They were building a process. Marcus was building a clock, and the clock was running. Because every hour Eleanor spent wherever she'd been taken made the odds worse. Lena looked up from her phone. There's something else. What? She swallowed. Miss Eleanor asked me last month what to do if someone ever tried to force me to tell them something. Marcus stared at her. What'd you say? I laughed, Lena said, voice cracking with sudden guilt. I thought she was being weird. Marcus felt a hard chill run under his skin. Not weird. Prepared. He looked back at Eleanor's house, at the porch, at the mailbox glinting under weak sunlight. This had not started 3 days ago. This had started years ago, and whatever Eleanor had been waiting for, it had finally caught up with her. Marcus swung onto his Harley. The engine roared alive. The older officer shouted something about staying available. Marcus ignored him. Lena grabbed her bike and pulled alongside. Absolutely not, Marcus said. You need me. I need you safe. She leaned in. And Eleanor needs us fast. He hated that she was right. He hated even more that the town's best witness was a teenager with a bike and more courage than most adults on the block. Marcus looked once toward the highway, then at Lena, then back at Maple Street, a small house, a broken routine, an old woman who had trained herself to be noticed. The message finally hit him in full. Eleanor had not just been living carefully, she had been living in warning. Marcus tightened his grip on the handlebars. If she missed the mailbox, something was wrong, and now they were out of time. They thought Detective Paul Mercer would help. For about 20 minutes, he did. Mercer met Marcus and Lena at the gas station off Route 9, where fluorescent lights buzzed over stained concrete and the smell of burnt coffee floated out every time the door opened. He was plainclothes, mid-40s, sharp tie, tired eyes, the kind of cop who looked like he'd seen enough to know when something ugly was hiding under a normal surface. He listened, really listened. That alone made him dangerous to hope for. Marcus told him about the house, the slipper, the van, Tommy's direction. Lena brought up the security cameras, the industrial strip, Eleanor's strange question from a month earlier. Mercer's expression tightened with each detail. Then he said the one thing Marcus had been waiting to hear all day. You're right. This wasn't voluntary. Lena exhaled hard, almost a laugh. Mercer pulled out a notepad. drew a quick map of the abandoned sites near the highway, and circled 3. If someone wanted privacy, quick access to the interstate, and a place nobody checks after dark, I'd start here. Marcus nodded slowly. Finally, a real ally. Mercer looked at him. Do not go in alone. Call me if you find anything. Marcus caught something odd in the detective's face. Not fear. Not exactly. More like pressure. But pressure could mean a lot of things. They split, and for a moment, it felt like the tide had turned. Then Lena's phone buzzed. She looked down, her face strained. What? Marcus asked. She turned the screen toward him. A text from an unknown number. Stop looking. She's lived this long because she knew when to stay quiet. Marcus's stomach went hard as steel. Mercer's card was still warm in his pocket. Lena whispered, How would they know we're looking? Neither of them spoke for 2 long seconds. The answer was obvious. Someone had heard too much. Or someone had passed it on. Hope, ally. Then disappointment. Shock. Marcus pulled his phone and called Mercer. Straight to voicemail. Again, same result. Lena backed up a step. You think it's him? I think, Marcus said carefully, we move like it is. The sun had started to dip, throwing amber light across the road in long, dirty bands. Semi-trucks moaned in the distance. A chain-link fence rattled somewhere in the wind. Time was bending toward night, and night belonged to whoever had Eleanor. That's when the caregiving chaos hit. Lena's grandmother called. She was crying too hard to make sense at first, just broken Spanish and panic and the sound of something falling in the background. Lena went white. My grandma, she said, she can't breathe. Everything changed. This is where most stories lose urgency. This one sharpened. Marcus and Lena tore back through town, tires hissing over pavement, the bike engine growling low. By the time they reached Lena's house, the porch light was already on. Though the sky wasn't dark yet, the front door stood open. Inside, the air smelled like Vicks, boiled rice, and fear. Mrs. Ortiz was in the kitchen chair, clutching her chest, inhaler on the floor, oxygen machine beeping angrily from the corner. Lena dropped to her knees. Abuela, look at me. Marcus scooped up the inhaler, checked it, handed it over. Empty. Call an ambulance, he said. Lena was already doing it. The kitchen was a storm of tiny important things. A kettle screaming on the stove. A dish towel burning against a hot burner. Medication bottles spilled across the table. A little dog barking frantically underfoot. Mrs. Storm. Ortiz trembling so badly she could barely get words out. Marcus killed the stove, grabbed the towel, opened a window, found the oxygen tubing kinked beneath a chair leg and pulled it free. The machine steadied with a softer hum. Lena guided her grandmother's breathing, voice cracking but firm. In, out, Mrs. Ortiz pointed weakly toward the hallway. Her meds? Marcus asked. Lena nodded. He ran. The hallway smelled like lavender powder and old wood. Family photos lined the wall. Birthdays, graduations, a dead husband in a guayabera smiling beside a younger Mrs. Briabera. Ortiz under summer light. Marcus found the pill organizer on the bathroom sink and brought it back just as the EMS siren wailed into the street. Chaos is retention because it tests character, and here it revealed everything. Marcus didn't hesitate. Lena didn't collapse. They worked. Together. When the paramedics finally stabilized Mrs. Ortiz, one of them said they'd caught it in time. Another 15 minutes and it could have become much worse. Lena sat on the porch steps afterward, shaking hard now that the crisis had passed. Marcus handed her a bottle of water. She stared at the street. I almost left her alone. No, Marcus said. You almost helped Eleanor and saved your grandmother in the same hour. Lena laughed once. Bitter, tearful. That feels illegal. He sat beside her. For a second, the town was all evening sounds. Cicadas starting up. Someone closing a garage door. A basketball thumping 2 streets over. The smell of rain waiting in the clouds. Then Mrs. Werner appeared at the fence holding a casserole dish no one had asked for. Poor thing, she told Lena, meaning well too late again. Your grandmother gave me this old envelope weeks ago to return to Eleanor, but I forgot. Marcus's head snapped around. What envelope? Mrs. Werner blinked. I don't know. It was mixed in with my junk mail. I kept meaning to. Marcus was already on his feet. Inside the dish, under plastic wrap, sat a yellowed envelope, unsealed, Eleanor's name written on the front in block letters. Lena took it with both hands. There was a photograph inside. Old. Creased. A little faded. It showed a younger Eleanor standing beside a man in a navy suit and a teenage boy who had Eleanor's eyes. On the back, 3 words were written in blue ink. Doc 14. Ask Daniel. Truth breadcrumb. Photo. Name drop. Place marker. Marcus felt the world narrow. Lena looked up at him. Daniel? Who? Marcus's eyes had already gone distant, memory turning over. There used to be a freight office near Dock 14, smuggling rumors, shady books, cash disappearing into clean businesses. Then Lena found the second item in the envelope. A tiny brass key taped inside the flap. No label, no note, just a key. Her pulse kicked in her throat. This is it, isn't it? Marcus stared at the photograph again. The teenage boy. Eleanor's son. The one nobody in town really talked about because nobody in town really knew anything. Suddenly the routine, the fear, the question about being forced to tell, the van, the threat text, the detective who vanished into voicemail, it all began to point in one direction. Not random criminals. Not burglars. Loose ends. Old money, old sin, and an old woman who knew where the skeletons were buried. Marcus stood. Get your grandmother's neighbor to stay with her. Lena rose too. I'm coming. He looked at her, wanted to say no, knew the answer already. The first drops of rain began to tap the porch roof. Sharp, cold, fast. Marcus took the photo, the key, and the last clean breath of the evening. Because now they had more than fear. They had breadcrumbs. And somewhere out by the highway, or the docks, or some rotting warehouse where men mistook age for weakness, Eleanor was still alive. She had to be. Because if she'd survived 6 years waiting for the wrong day to come, then she had not done all that just to disappear now. The warehouse sat at the edge of town like a lie that had stopped trying to look respectable, rust bleeding down corrugated metal, broken windows patched with plywood, rain darkening the gravel lot. The air smelled like wet dirt, oil, and river rot drifting in from the freight yards. Far off, a train horn moaned low and lonely through the dark. Marcus killed the engine a block away. Lena slid off her bike beside him, soaked through at the shoulders, breathing too fast but refusing to leave. A pale security light flickered near the loading dock, giving the whole place a dying heartbeat. Marcus pointed to a side entrance. Stay behind me. Not happening, Lena whispered. He didn't argue. No time. Inside, the warehouse breathed in echoes. Water dripped from somewhere overhead. The concrete floor was slick. Old pallets leaned against stained walls. A chain rattled in the draft. Voices rose and fell deeper inside, men's voices, impatient and sharp. Marcus held up a hand. They moved closer. Then they heard it clearly. She hasn't said anything. A second voice answered, colder. She will. Nobody keeps a 6-year routine unless they're guarding something. Marcus looked at Lena. There it was. Confirmation. Not random. Never random. They edged to a gap between stacked crates and looked through. Eleanor sat tied to a metal chair under a hanging work light. The bulb buzzed and swayed, throwing harsh yellow shadows over her bruised face and silver hair. One side of her lip was split. Her cardigan hung crooked, but her back was straight. Straight. That alone hit like a hammer. 3 men circled her, one broad and shaved-headed, one thin with a twitchy jaw, and one in a dark raincoat standing slightly apart, as if he preferred giving orders to doing the dirty work himself. Then the man in the raincoat stepped half into the light. Lena inhaled so sharply Marcus thought it would give them away. Detective Mercer. Hope ally. Betrayal complete. Marcus felt something inside him go utterly still. Mercer crouched in front of Eleanor. Your son moved money through accounts that still matter to people with very bad tempers. He died before he could give us the ledger. You've had 6 years. I'm done being patient. Eleanor lifted her eyes and smiled. Not kindly, not warmly, a small, exhausted, dangerous smile. My boy died because men like you always think old women scare easy. Mercer slapped the chair arm, not her. The restraint made it worse. Where is it? Eleanor's voice came out thin but steady. Not where fools would look. Marcus's fists clenched. Lena touched his sleeve once. A warning. Timing mattered. Mercer stood and nodded to the shaved-head man. Search her house again. Tear out walls if you have to. The man hesitated. What if she already gave it to someone? Mercer turned back toward Eleanor. Did you? Eleanor said nothing. Work light buzzing, rain hitting the roof, a forklift cooling somewhere in the dark with little ticking sounds from old metal. The whole world felt pinned on what she would say next. Then Eleanor whispered, "I made sure I'd be missed." Mercer frowned, and Marcus understood, fully, finally. The mailbox routine was never about hope. It was insurance, a signal, a 6-year fuse. Eleanor had trained the neighborhood to witness her existence even if they didn't know they were doing it. She turned herself into a daily landmark so that absence itself would become evidence. Mercer didn't get it, but Marcus did, and in that second of confusion, he moved, fast, violent, precise. He hit the shaved head man first, driving him sideways into a stack of plastic crates that exploded across the floor. The twitchy one reached into his waistband, but Lena whipped a rusted wrench from a shelf and flung it hard into his wrist. He yelped, dropped the weapon, and Marcus buried a shoulder into his chest. Mercer spun, cursing. The hanging lamp swung wildly now, turning the room into flashes of light and dark, light and dark. Eleanor's chair tipped halfway. Lena lunged and steadied her. Boots pounded on wet concrete. Someone shouted. Somewhere outside, a dog began barking. Marcus drove Mercer into a support beam. "Dirty cop," he snarled. Mercer grunted through clenched teeth. "You have no idea what she's tied to." Marcus hit him again. "Try me." The shaved head man staggered up with a crowbar. Lena saw him first. "Marcus!" Marcus turned just in time. Crowbar whistled through the air. He caught part of the blow on his forearm, pain flashing white-hot, then slammed the man into a pallet jack and sent him crashing down. Lena dropped beside Eleanor, fingers shaking as she worked the rope knots loose. "Miss Eleanor, stay with me, stay with me." Eleanor looked at her, dazed but lucid. "You're Lena Ortiz." Lena blinked. "You know me? You carry groceries badly," Eleanor muttered. Lena laughed despite everything. "That feels rude for a rescue. Means I'm alive." That line alone kept Lena moving. Finally, the ropes gave. Marcus hauled Mercer upright just as sirens began to rise in the distance, faint, then building. Not because Mercer had called them. Because Lena had sent a location ping to 911 the moment they parked. Lovable side character. Progress forced. Mercer heard the sirens and his whole expression cracked. "You stupid little." Marcus slammed him face first onto a workbench and cuffed one wrist with Mercer's own spare cuffs. By the time officers stormed the warehouse, the scene looked like the truth after a long delay. A corrupt detective, 2 hired enforcers, an old woman they'd underestimated, a mechanic with a bleeding arm, and a teenage girl standing protectively between danger and someone vulnerable. Public reckoning was already warming up, but the deeper reveal came in pieces. At the ambulance, under flashing red-blue light and the medicinal smell of antiseptic and rain, Eleanor finally told them enough. Her son, Daniel Briggs, had worked logistics at the docks years earlier. Legit on paper. Dirty in reality. He discovered a money pipeline moving through shell companies, drug routes, ghost accounts, and law enforcement protection. He tried to get out. He didn't survive long enough to do it cleanly. Before he died, he left Eleanor a ledger key and instructions. Not the money. The map to the money. Names. Transfers. Judges. Cops, freight managers, men who built their lives on the idea that ordinary people never matter enough to be dangerous. Eleanor became dangerous the moment she understood what she had. "So why stay?" one officer asked. Eleanor wrapped both hands around the blanket on her lap. Rainwater and tears had left tracks on her face, but her voice held. "Because running makes you easier to erase." Marcus stood nearby, blood drying on his knuckles. Eleanor glanced at him, then at Lena. "I needed someone to notice if the pattern broke." The officer looked down, ashamed in a way Marcus appreciated too late to feel good about. Lena reached into her pocket and brought out the brass key. "Is this for the ledger?" Eleanor stared at it for a long beat, then nodded. "Where?" Marcus asked. Eleanor's eyes drifted toward Maple Street in her mind, then back to him. "In the mailbox." Silence. Even the paramedic paused. Eleanor let out one fragile breath that was almost a laugh. "No one ever looked there. Everyone assumes old women are sentimental. No one assumes we're strategic." Marcus shook his head once, stunned. 6 years. The answer had sat in plain sight at the end of her driveway. Daily. Visible. Untouched. Mercer and men like him searched everywhere except the one place the whole street ignored. Now the reckoning had a center. And by morning, Maple Street was going to learn exactly who Eleanor Briggs had really been. By sunrise, Maple Street no longer belonged to routine. It belonged to consequence. News vans lined the curb where kids usually waited for school pickup. Camera crews huddled under jackets in the damp morning chill. Porch lights clicked off one by one as neighbors stepped outside with coffee mugs and guilty faces. The air smelled like wet mulch, diesel exhaust, and the sharp paper scent of fresh newsprint from the bundle someone had dropped at the corner box. Every station in town had a version of the same headline. Elderly woman's abduction exposes corruption ring. But headlines are clumsy things. They flatten courage. They reduce years of fear into one dramatic night. They miss the quiet engineering of survival. Eleanor understood that. She stepped onto her porch at 9:15 a.m., and Maple Street went silent. No one told them to hush. They just did. Because seeing her come back was different from hearing she'd survived. She wore a fresh cardigan, pale blue this time, a blanket still wrapped over her shoulders against the cold. One bruise darkened along her jaw. Her movements were slower, careful, measured by pain. But she was upright, composed, present. The morning sun broke through the last low clouds and laid warm gold across the porch rail. A cardinal landed there as if even the birds had kept track of the hour. Eleanor looked down the familiar path, then began to walk. Each step made the neighborhood watch. Mrs. Depp. Warner cried into both hands. Tommy Rake stood on his bike pedals for a better view. The woman who used to jog past without looking had stopped mid-stretch, face red with embarrassment she couldn't outrun. Lena stood at the sidewalk with her grandmother, who had insisted on coming despite the portable oxygen tank rolling behind her. Mrs. Ortiz lifted one trembling hand in a tiny, queenly wave. Lena grinned through tears and mouthed, "Told you." Marcus was across the street on his Harley. Engine idling low. Same as always. Same, but not the same. Because now the whole town knew what he had known in silence, that a person can save a life simply by refusing not to notice it. Eleanor reached the mailbox. She rested one hand on the top, feeling the cool metal. The same box that had held the key. The same box that had anchored 6 years of warning. The same box everyone saw and nobody understood. She opened it. Inside was one envelope. Not from police, not from the press, no return address. Just a plain white envelope placed there at dawn. Marcus tensed across the street. Lena did too. Eleanor pulled it out slowly and opened it in the morning light. Inside was a single note from federal investigators confirming the ledger had triggered arrests beyond the town line, accounts frozen, warrants issued, names rolling upward. This was bigger than Maple Street, bigger than Mercer, bigger than one warehouse and one night. Layered payoff. The truth had not only saved Eleanor, it was still moving, still burning through the rot. Eleanor folded the paper and closed her eyes for one long second. Maybe for Daniel. Maybe for all the mornings she had walked this path wondering whether the trap would spring today. Maybe for the unbearable exhaustion of having been right for so long. Then she turned. And this time, instead of going straight back inside, she faced the street, faced all of them. The neighbors who had theories. The ones who had meant to check. The ones who had mistaken familiarity for knowledge. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. "I know most of you never meant harm," she said. No one moved. A camera clicked somewhere, then stopped. Eleanor continued. "But neglect doesn't always look cruel. Sometimes it looks busy. Sometimes it looks polite. Sometimes it looks like seeing someone every day and never once truly seeing them." Mrs. Warner lowered her head. The jogger started crying. Tommy looked confused but serious, like his little kid heart understood enough. Eleanor lifted the envelope slightly. "My son left me something dangerous. I survived because I learned a simple truth." She looked straight at Marcus, then at Lena, then at the mailbox. "If you make your life visible, absence becomes evidence." That line landed hard. Marcus took off his helmet. Lena squeezed her grandmother's hand. Eleanor's expression softened. "But I was wrong about one thing. A hush inside the hush. I thought I only needed one person to notice." She looked around the street. "Turns out I needed one person to begin it." Now the payoff widened. Because this wasn't just Marcus's victory, it was a demand placed on everyone listening. Be the one who begins it. Notice. Check. Ask. See. Eleanor gave a tiny nod toward Lena. And maybe one stubborn girl with poor grocery carrying skills. The street laughed through tears. Lena barked out a shocked laugh. She said that again. Even Marcus smiled. That broke the tension just enough for breathing to come back to the block. Then Marcus lifted 2 fingers from the handlebar. The old gesture. Small, wordless, sacred now. Eleanor returned the nod, and in that exchange, the whole story resolved itself. Not in gunfire or handcuffs or headlines, but in recognition, in proof, in witness. He saw her. She knew it. That was the bridge between almost disappearing and being brought home. Marcus started the bike. The low rumble rolled across the street like a heartbeat settling back into rhythm. As he pulled away, Maple Street didn't look the same. Not because the houses had changed, because the eyes had. People were looking at each other now, really looking. At the widower on the corner. At the teenager carrying too much alone. At the old woman 3 doors down who always watered her roses at dusk. At the boy on the curb who noticed vans no one else remembered. The mailbox stayed where it always had. Plain, ordinary, powerful. And from that day on, whenever someone on Maple Street failed to appear where they always appeared, somebody checked. Because they had learned the cost of backgrounding a life. They had learned that habits can be lifelines. That routine can be a flare. That being seen is not a luxury, it is a form of safety. And long after the cameras left, long after the trial, long after Mercer's name became a stain, the town pretended it never trusted, the story people told was not really about corruption or money or even abduction. It was about attention, about the man who noticed, the girl who refused to stand down, and the old woman who built herself a signal out of ordinary mornings. So remember this. Every time the world teaches you to rush past what is quiet, if she missed the mailbox, something was wrong. And sometimes, saving a life begins with realizing someone was there all along.